afternoon and welcome to Law Power Hour. I'd like to thank all of you for listening during the year, and I wish you all the best for a Merry Christmas and Happy Kwanzaa and Happy Hanukkah and Happy New Year. Today we're very, very fortunate. I'm very fortunate because I've been trying to get you on the air for a long time. Prosecutor Kim Worthy, thank you for coming.
My pleasure. Is this your last show of the season?
No, we're going to have one on the 30th. We're probably going to go over the do's and don'ts for the holiday weekend, which we do every year. Like, do not drive under the influence of narcotics or drugs
Always a good one,
or alcohol.
right?
Don't go out with anyone in the car that you don't know.
Yes.
And make sure that you go out with people and check them out to make sure that they're not carrying weapons, because we don't want you to spend the weekend in jail.
And never set a drink down at a party.
Oh, that's a good
Yes.
advice.
Yeah,
Maybe if you're going to have a drink at a party, make it one,
that's also a good one.
or call one of the driving services to take you home, because it's safer than rather be sorry and spend the weekend. And this is going to be a long holiday weekend.
It is. One of my children doesn't go back to school until January the 8th.
That's correct.
That's long.
And you know, one of the things about the holiday weekend, when we have these long holiday weekends, they start on Thursday evening. Like Christmas, people start on Thursday evening and they party all the way through
Yep.
the 26th. So we have to be very careful.
Yeah, you do. You do. That's
And-
good advice.
Speaking of being very careful, I know there's an area that you're very concerned about today. It has to do with possession and use of guns. Is that correct?
Yes, and more specifically, and I'm not talking, just to be very clear, I'm not talking about people's right to have them. I'm not talking about anything like that or regulating that. But what I am talking about more specifically is we have had over 20 children in Wayne County in the last few years that have been either killed or seriously injured themselves or somebody else in the homes of lawful gun owners. And I am very distressed by any deaths or killing anyway. Obviously, we all are. But specifically and particularly the ones that are completely preventable. And if you have a dangerous weapon in your house, and you have every right to have that, but you also, I think, you must be very careful with that weapon and storing it, especially if you know that there are going to be children and minors in the home.
So the word is accountability.
It is.
And by accountability, you're talking about using good judgment and sense in where you store your gun and how you store your gun.
That's right. And I'm not talking about a parent or a guardian or anybody in the home that's an adult that stores it properly and then the child somehow finds it. I'm not talking about those individuals. Where you come home, you appropriately lock your gun up, you put it in a place where you don't think a child can ever find it, and then something happens as a result. I'm talking about the lawful gun owners that leave weapons, loaded weapons in many cases, under pillows, under beds, in visible areas to children when they know that children are going to be in the home playing. We had a case where the gun was placed on top of a game console, where the gun owner knew and the owner of the house knew that those children would be in that room playing all the time. So that's what I'm talking about. We must hold each other accountable. And even my friends that own guns agree and think that they should be held to a high standard when it comes to safely policing and storing your weapons at home or in your car.
Well, let me ask you an important question. Do you believe that people should store guns at home loaded or unloaded?
My personal belief is it should be unloaded, but again, I understand the argument. If you have the gun in your home for protection, you don't want to, and you hear an intruder coming in, you don't want to take time to load the gun. I get that. But it should be stored in a safe way, in a safe place, where minors and children cannot have access.
Yeah, in other words, you can't put it in the closet, up on a shelf where a child can climb up on the bed, get up on a dresser, reach up under a pillow in the closet and get a gun.
Yeah, and I think in the closet on a shelf that you don't think is accessible is maybe a grayer area, unless you know the child knows that the gun is there. But when you're talking about under a pillow or under a bed or invisible in a room where a child can see, I think that's just inherently dangerous. And even if you, as a citizen, you lawfully store you store your guns in a safe and reasonable manner, you may send your child next door to play with a friend, and your neighbor doesn't do so, and your child doesn't come home. So again, we have to be very, very careful, I think, when we have weapons in our homes.
Do you think it's unreasonable if you're my neighbor, if I asked you if you have a gun in your house?
I don't think it's unreasonable at all. In fact, before I send my children anywhere, I want to know, and I have to rely on what they tell me, obviously. I want to know if you have a gun in your house. I want to know if it's stored. For example, when you take your child, and it's probably been a while since you've had very young children, when you take your child to a pediatrician, you fill out a long form, and one of the questions on that form before you see the doctor is, do you have a smoke detector? And others, do you have a gun? And again, we should be talking about it, we should hold people accountable, and we should be reminded early and often that if you have a gun in your home, you need to store it safely.
Let's talk about the flip side of it now. You have a gun. Someone gets access to the gun, and someone's killed. Can you charge them with a crime?
It's going to be, it's very, very fact specific, and so we'll have to do an investigate, have the police will have to do an investigation and then bring us a recommendation on a warrant request, but it's going to be very fact specific. I think if you have a gun and you lay it on the bed and you know children are going to be in the room, that's one thing. I think if you have a gun and you, like I said before, you safely store it and children somehow get access to it, that's quite another. And so my colleagues across the state, we've discussed this many times, and I know in certain cities, certain places up north, for example, it's very common to leave maybe a gun by the door or something like that. But again, if you have children in the home, we need to be extra careful and extra diligent about when children are in the home.
Do you think we should pass laws in Michigan to require every individual who purchases a gun to take classes on how to safely store, care for, and use their weapon?
Absolutely.
Now,
But we do
don't
have
laws on that. We have them on CPL right now.
We have them on CPL, but there are some states who require nothing, and you can conceal carry. But yes, I do think that it's a dangerous weapon. It's only meant for one purpose, basically, or a couple purposes. And so all I'm saying, and I'm not saying you shouldn't have them, and I'm not offering an opinion on that. All I'm saying that as a prosecutor, and what I see day in and day out, a 3-year-old girl, child, or boy dead because someone that was an adult and had a deadly weapon didn't take the time to properly store it. That life is not going to come back. So that's all I'm saying is we need to be diligent. So yes, I do feel that there should be laws that regulate that.
So by being vigilant, we can avoid tragedy. It's that
Absolutely.
simple. Now, recently, I understand you were in Washington dealing with gun
I was.
issues. Is that correct?
Yes, I was. I was with about 24, 25 other large and medium-sized district attorneys and prosecutors across the country. We converged on Capitol Hill, and we talked to our senators and our congresspeople and members of their staff about 3 things. We talked about supporting Senator Feinstein, Dianne Feinstein of California, her legislation to ban bump stocks. And as you know, bump stocks were used in Las Vegas to kill the 58 people, and I guess 57 plus himself. 58 people, and he was able to fire, and we had a presentation by the DA there, and he was able to fire some ungodly number of shots within a few minutes.
Can you
Within a few
imagine?
seconds, actually.
Can you imagine that there's civil litigation pending over this right now? That there's a class action that was started in the state of California, and they're suing the hotel, they're suing the promoter of the event, and they're suing the police department because of this. Can you imagine that this is occurring?
I didn't know that, but I'm not surprised, unfortunately. But again, we want to make sure that they are banned completely from use and sale in the United States of America. Another thing we were doing is, and we didn't do a lot of work on this, we certainly became knowledgeable about it, but again, there is legislation in our Congress and our Senate to deregulate silencers. And a lot of people think from watching TV that a silencer, you put a silencer on a gun, and it completely makes you not hear any sound that gun is making when it's being fired. And that's not true. What silencers do is distort the sound of a gun. So one of the reasons why we're against this is because we are fearful for the safety of our law enforcement. If there should be a radio run to a business or a school or a private residence or anywhere where shots have been fired, there's an active shooter, for example, and they're using silencers, or he or she is using a silencer, the police officers cannot tell from what direction these shots are being fired. So not only do they place themselves in danger, but they cannot protect the citizen that they've been called out to do. So we do not think, silencers are currently very well regulated, and we want to make sure that it remains that way.
How are they regulated in Michigan?
You know what, I don't know how exactly they're regulated in Michigan. I know that that the ATF is able to tell where all the silencers are in the country, and other organizations, but again, they want to completely deregulate that, and we're against that. And the last thing, and there are many issues when it comes to firearms, and the last thing that we were there is we wanted to speak in opposition, and it did pass, but we wanted to speak in opposition of the concealed carry reciprocity. And that means every state has their own laws, and well, some states have no laws, on how you can get a gun permit, or if you need a gun permit at all. In some states, you can carry a weapon if you are a convicted felon. In some states, you have to be 18. You can be 18. In some states, you have to be 21. And so they want to be able to carry their weapons across state lines with no penalties. And so that means we are really going to the lowest common denominator. So in the states where there are no permits, they are able to come into the state of Michigan and concealed carry. And our law enforcement will really be tasked with knowing what the laws are in all 50 states. And again, we are concerned about our law enforcement when it comes to these issues, and our citizenry.
Okay, let's break this down a little bit for our listeners on the concealed gun reciprocity, which is really, really an important issue.
Yes.
So we cross over into the state of Ohio.
Right.
And I don't know if this is their law, but we'll pretend it is. And in Ohio, I can be a convicted felon, and I can get a gun. So I can travel into Michigan, if we had reciprocity, and I can carry my gun.
Yeah, 50-state reciprocity is what the bill is. So, yes, that's true. So even, let's just say, and again, I don't know the laws, I don't proclaim to know the laws in all 50 states, but let's say that in Minnesota, you apply for a weapon, and you're denied. Well, because there are some states in the United States of America that don't require any kind of permit, you can lawfully conceal carry in Michigan.
Or you could go to another state, for example, if you're denied in Minnesota, and you could shop around until you could find a state where you could possess a weapon.
Sure. But you would be able to do it in all 50 states because there are 12 states in the United States. Don't ask me to name them. But I knew that there are 12 states in the United States where there are no rules or laws at all regulating concealed carry, so, or getting a permit. And so, again, the lowest common denominator. So you would be able to conceal carry in every state. And like I said, traffic stops are dangerous enough. But this is going to increase exponentially the people that are carrying weapons in a place where law enforcement can't tell that they have them.
Now you're raising an important issue, the open carry laws. Because not every state has open carry laws, do they?
They don't, and I have to tell you, every time anybody asks me a question about that, I literally have to look it up there. It's so confusing. I do know there was recent legislation to get rid of the ban of carrying guns, open carrying guns in schools, churches, and courthouses. So I don't know exactly where that is, but I know that has advanced, and so we may be indeed looking at that. I am not a fan, obviously, of being able to conceal open carry, different than concealed carry, open carry in a school or in a church or in a courthouse. But again, I may have nothing to say about that because that's the direction our Michigan legislature is moving in.
Currently, the Michigan Senate has passed that. It has not been enacted into law yet, but I'd like to break this down and discuss it. We're going to take a break for a minute. We'll come back and talk about it.
All right.
Are you in legal trouble? Are you in need of legal advice? Or just have general legal questions? Call 1-800-529-8721. That's 1-800-LAW-USA1. And watch Law Power Hour and get your questions answered by experienced attorneys who are experts in their field. That's Law Power Hour, hosted by Barry Keller, attorney at law. Saturdays at 10 a.m. here on WHPR Detroit Live.
Okay, under the new law, if I want to carry a gun in the school and that passes, I'm going to be able to carry a gun on my person when I go into school with my son or daughter for parent-teacher conferences. Does that make sense?
Not to me, it does not.
So can the school board, on the other hand, and there's case law in Michigan, that says that the school board can pass a rule that no parent can bring a gun on the premises,
Right?
and that supersedes the gun law. How
That's
do-
my understanding.
Right. No, I have researched that law, and 2016, the Supreme Court denied certiorari on a case dealing with a specific issue. So the question is, if somebody brings a gun on the premises in the school district, let's say that the Detroit Public Schools, for example, have passed a rule that no one's allowed to bring a gun on the premises, and a parent brings a gun on the premises, are you going to prosecute that individual?
That is what prosecutors across the state are already grappling with. And we discuss this often, and we are renewing those discussions in light of the bill that has passed the Senate. But again, it's not law yet. So those are very, very difficult, and you may think it's cut and dry, but it's not. Those are very, very difficult decisions to make.
That's why I ask you the question. I don't believe it's cut and dry. I believe that our listeners have to understand that it's a gray area.
It's a very great, that's why I said we grapple with it. It's not cut and dry. I think, and I said prosecutors across the state, we are grappling with that issue. And we often have discussions about school district X has passed a law that bans this. But again, if this passes, that could change that. So these are very, very difficult. Each person has their own particular view of that, and we just took a look at it on a case-to-case basis. We don't get a lot of that, though.
I'm going to give you one of my favorite brain teasers. I've got a CPL. I go to my favorite medical marijuana facility.
You would have to bring a mail. Okay.
No, I'm not going to go into the whole area. I promise you I'm
Okay,
not.
go ahead.
But I have to bring this up because it's important for
Yeah.
listeners to understand. I go there, I've got a permit. Medical marijuana gives me the right to purchase it. I've been to my doctor, I'm certified, so I'm squeaky clean on that side.
You've met all the requirements, okay?
Right. I go in, I purchase my marijuana, I'm driving down the road, and I've got my CPL, I've got my gun on me, but I'm weaving all over the place because I'm hiring a kite from Cush.
Because
Now,
you're what? Oh, okay.
From Cush.
Okay.
You know,
Yeah,
you understand.
Got it.
Okay. I only use street because I want people to reflect on it. I don't want them to forget what you're going to say now. I've committed 2 crimes, haven't I?
Yes.
Would you tell our listeners what those crimes are?
Well, you are driving a car under the influence, and you're violating the terms and conditions of your card.
And the third problem is that I have a concealed weapon on me.
Hmm?
And if I'm under the influence of narcotics or alcohol, I can lose my CPL permit.
You can, and also you would be ineligible for our gun program in our in-house program as well.
Okay, let's talk about your in-house gun program. How does that work?
We decided long ago that if we have a law-abiding citizen, let's just say you have a 42-year-old man who has never been in trouble with the law, and they, let's say they had a concealed carry permit that expired 9 months ago, and it just slipped their mind, for example, and they are stopped. They have a traffic stop. They're stopped. The officer asks them if they have a gun in the car. They say yes. They produce the gun, and then we charge them with carrying a concealed weapon under the law. I don't really feel that that particular person, because each crime, they've committed a crime, so we would charge people accordingly. But when it comes to what our offer will be, if a person's employed, they're a contributing member of society, again, they're 42 years old, never been in trouble with the law, they did comply with the law somewhat later on, the gun is legally owned and legally registered, we'll offer them a misdemeanor.
And you're probably one of the only counties that I know of in southeastern Michigan that would do that.
I just don't think that everybody should be painted with a broad brush. I generally think anyway in the criminal law that everybody should not be painted with a broad brush. When it comes to charging, yes, everybody should be charged the same regardless of circumstances. When it comes to negotiating a plea offer or a sentencing, it should be very individual on the citizen, that whoever's being affected. Another example would be, and again, how it works in Wayne County is whoever's representing this particular defendant is now facing a count of carrying a concealed weapon, a 5-year felony in the state of Michigan. The attorney is to write a letter, give us any supporting documentation, letters of support, pay stubs, information about their particular client as to why they should get a misdemeanor instead of a felony, even though they're factually guilty of carrying a concealed weapon, the 5-year felony. We have our our docket attorneys, our supervising attorneys that will meet. I don't know how often they meet. And they will decide, they will look at every case, review the letter, review the case, and then they'll make a recommendation to me about whether they should get the misdemeanor or not. And then I will make the final, then they will come to see me and I'll make the final decision. Another example that we get commonly is a college student who goes to school, and I'm just picking a state, I don't know the law, and what the law is in Kentucky. Let's say they go to college in Kentucky, and they have a weapon, they have a permit that's in Kentucky. And they are ignorant of the law, that's really no excuse, but they are coming home and then they're stopped for a gun. The person is a stellar student, or even an average student. Really, a stellar student has never been in trouble, and we don't want to have that person tagged with a 5-year felony for the rest of their life. But again, the gun must be lawfully owned, it must be registered, and we think that there are certain circumstances that we will allow that person to plead guilty to a misdemeanor even though they're factually guilty of a felony.
But let's talk about this a little further. You pointed out that if I was in the car with drugs or under the influence of drugs, I wouldn't be treated the same.
No, we wouldn't, no, because again, you are committing more than one felony.
Okay, that's the point that has to be brought out.
Right.
Now, I have a set of safety rules that I tell people to follow during the holidays, and I've been doing this ever since I've been on the air. And one of them has to do with making sure when you're riding in the car that no one in the car has a weapon on their person unless they have a CPL.
Right.
And would you tell our listeners why it's so important for everyone in the car to know this rule?
Because under the law, we can charge everyone in the car with the possession of one gun, determining on what the facts are.
And you can hold
And again,
people-
we study this very carefully, and I'm not saying that every time a gun is found in the car, we charge everybody. That's just not true. But the law says that you can under certain circumstances.
and you can hold them up to 72 hours.
Well, it's 48.
Well, under certain circumstances, you can hold them a little longer if you're conducting an investigation. I'm not going to cross over
Yeah.
into your rules,
Yeah.
but there are certain circumstances where some could be held a little longer, correct?
True. We try to stick to 48, though, yeah.
Okay. So if there are 4 people going out Christmas Eve, someone has a gun, they all get stopped, technically everyone could be arrested, detained for 48 hours.
Again, yes, they technically could. And I'm not saying that we do in every case, or that we do in, we just don't do that in every case. But yes, technically they could. They'll be facing a 5-year felony, yes.
Okay. Now, if I have a permit, and this is not a law school exam for you, certainly you could teach me the law. But the question is a very important one. If I have a permit to own a gun, and I'm transporting that gun, there's only one safe way to transport the gun. Is that correct?
Unloaded and in the trunk.
Okay. Did you hear that? Unloaded and in the trunk is the...
And the ammunition must be separate from the gun.
And when it's in the trunk, does it have to be in a container?
Yes.
Okay. That container cannot be a holster, can it?
No.
Okay, it has to be in a box, it has to be locked up in the trunk in order to carry it and transport it safely.
Yes, and we would not charge that.
Tell me, do you have any idea, and honestly, I don't know, and I don't mean to put you on the spot, how many unregistered guns do we still have in the city
Oh,
of
I don't
Detroit?
know. I don't know that. Yeah.
I know, but we have a huge number
Right.
of unregistered guns.
I would say thousands if I had to guess.
And we have these shootings, unfortunately, going on every week. I know our stats for the year are down, thank God, on murders from last year. They're down about 10%.
I don't know that to be
No,
true, but that's what they report, yes.
Right, that's what they reported. But we still have this problem with the indiscriminate firing of firearms in public places. They had this Christmas function a couple weeks ago downtown on the weekend, and somebody shot because they got in an argument.
Well, I can't talk about the facts because we just charged that case.
Okay, I'm sorry, but I will apologize.
Yeah.
But these are issues that we're concerned about today with people carrying guns, aren't they?
Yes. Yes.
So what's the solution? Should we prohibit people from carrying arms or permit them to carry arms?
I'm not going to go that far. I'm not going to go that far. My concern is, and what we see, and I'm not, we have, of course, the Second Amendment and all of that, although I think sometimes it's misapplied, but I'm not talking about that. I'm not talking about restricting people's rights. I'm not talking about telling them what they can do. But what I am talking about is following the law. And I am talking about safe storage. And I'm talking about a lawful gun. All bets are off when the guns are illegally bought, maintained, and stored, in my opinion.
You know, one of the things that really scares me during the holidays is when people are at home and they're celebrating the holidays, and they don't have noisemakers. They use guns as noisemakers.
Unfortunately, that's true, yes.
And unfortunately, a lot of people get injured that way because of the reckless firing of firearms.
I mean, this sounds so obvious and so trite, but there's an old saying that I'm sure everybody knows that bullets have no eyes. And so we have had people fire, we've had cases in the past, and I'm sure we'll have cases in the future, and I'm sure we have cases now, where a gun has been fired and it has pierced the window of some innocent person's house and killed a 90-year-old grandmother, or pierced someone's house and killed an innocent 5-year-old that was sitting on the couch watching TV.
You know,
It happens often, unfortunately.
2 years ago I had a case, and it's kind of scary. This young man went into his stepfather's gun locker. And I had a gun locker. And I don't know how he got the combination, but he got the combination of gun locker. And he got out an AK-47. And he was outside firing it. And some of the bullets ricocheted and went through the side of a car and injured the young woman in the car. Reckless as it may be, he still committed a felony.
Well, in some cases, depending what all the facts were, it could be homicide.
Right, well, thank God she was not killed.
Oh, okay.
You know, she was seriously injured, but that in and of itself is not what we want. We don't want anybody to be injured or killed. But the point is, weapons should not be used for entertainment purposes.
Yes, I believe that people have a right to own their guns. We have many hunters in the state. Michigan's a big hunting state. I believe hunting season just passed. And I am not talking about people who lawfully purchase, who lawfully store, who lawfully use their guns. I have no problem with that. I have a problem, like I said a minute ago, with people who are indiscriminate, people who use their weapons for entertainment, people who leave their weapons not safely stored, people who fire recklessly and indiscriminately and carelessly, and people who use guns, of course, to commit crime. Those are the things I have a problem with.
Now, one of the areas I want to touch on, and I'm going to raise the topic and we're going to take a break for a minute, is whether people who obtain guns legally, they have a license and they go out and get a gun, should have to submit to some type of psychological evaluation or screening before they're permitted to purchase a weapon.
There definitely should be forms of background checks, whether you're buying a gun in a store or at the Gibraltar Trade Center or anywhere. There should be background checks. And I think they should be expanded. I think that every state should have them. And I think they should be regulated. So I think we should do our very best to make sure that guns are not in the hands of someone who's mentally ill, someone who's unstable, and some people who just should not have them.
Well, let me ask you a question, and I want you to think about it because we're going to actually take a break, and then I want to hear your answer when we come back. Suppose that I proposed legislation that required from the time of actual purchase to receipt of the weapon 7 days in between, so that a background check could be conducted. Is that reasonable? We'll be right back, and I want you to answer.
Are you in legal trouble? Are you in need of legal advice? Or just have general legal questions? Call 1-800-529-8721. That's 1-800-LAW-USA1. And watch Law Power Hour and get your questions answered by experienced attorneys who are experts in their field. That's Law Power Hour, hosted by Barry Keller, attorney at law. Saturdays at 10 a.m. here on WHPR Detroit Live.
Suppose that I proposed legislation that required from the time of actual purchase to receipt of the weapon 7 days in between, so that a background check could be conducted. Is that reasonable? So what's your answer to
I think
my
that's very
que-
reasonable.
Because, you know, there should be a cooling off period. Because sometimes when a person goes out to buy a gun, there's a concern as to the motive for purchasing the weapon. And here you are at the gun store. So I'm going up to one of these big outlets like Bass Pro, for example, and they've got this great counter and they're unbelievable. I go in there to buy my fishing equipment, and you can buy every kind of weapon you could think of. So when I go in and I say, gee, I want to buy that Glock over there, and they sell me the Glock, and I've got to go, you know, get a license for the gun, and I get the license for the gun, there's no background check, is there?
No,
Because I've got to sign a form and say that I'm not a felon, right?
right.
Once I sign that form, once I've signed the form and answer several other questions related that are on the form, I'm free and clear to buy the gun.
I think so.
Then it's on me if I'm not telling the truth, and it's not on the person who's selling the gun.
And we have many states that have background checks. We have many gun store owners who are very, very diligent. And even if you have my view that the gun should not be in the hands, and I'll add a class of people, I also don't think the gun should be in the hands of domestic abusers. People who have committed domestic violence, I also do not think they should be allowed to have a gun, frankly. I'll go that far when it comes to domestic abusers. But even the most careful background check that there could be, the most extensive one, you're still not going to be able to screen out everybody who shouldn't have one. But at least we should try as a nation to make sure that the guns are in the hands of people who should have them.
Well, I'll share with you just a small example of heated passion purchase of a gun. You and I are married.
Mhm.
You got a PPO against me because I'm hostile,
Okay?
angry, I've threatened you. I go out and buy a gun. Nobody's going to know that you have a PPO against me, are they?
No, well, the court, no, but no, the person you're buying the gun from won't know yet. No.
And there's nothing in the PPO that says that I can't buy a gun.
I don't know. Some PPOs I think are getting fairly extensive, but for the most part, no, there's not.
No, it says, you know, that I can't use a gun doesn't prohibit me from buying it.
I don't think I've ever seen one that says you cannot buy a gun. That's
Yeah,
correct.
That's my point. So I go out and buy a gun, and then I'm angry, and I see you getting in your car. Well, I can't go near the house, but I shoot at you from across the street.
Or you violate your PPO and go near the house and shoot.
Right. Either way, I've done it. So if we had a law that said that there had to be screening for a week and required an extra fee to check out an individual's background, to see if there's a PPO, to see if they have a prior arrest record, to see, you know, if they have assaultive behavior. Some of the criteria that we look at, or psychological background where they've had problems in the past. Or, for example, they don't receive at least a general discharge from the service, because if you receive a dishonorable discharge, in some states you cannot own a weapon.
Right.
So having this kind of background check within a week would give us some understanding of the motivation and the reason why an individual would purchase a gun.
I agree. I think that there should be required extensive background checks when you are buying a gun.
Now, one of the things that we talked about and touched on was this a bump stock that you were talking
Yes.
about earlier. Something that you probably are not aware of, but the man who committed all those killings in Las Vegas, he was on Prozac.
I didn't know that.
Well, I've talked to some of the lawyers out there who are handling the cases. So it's another area. If people are taking psychotropic medication because they have emotional problems, there should be some way of ferreting out this information, because people who are not stable and balanced, again, should be prohibited from purchasing.
Yeah, I'm not sure I would go that far. I think if there's been a demonstrated history of mental illness, I think that's one thing. I think that if you're having some issues, depression, or many issues that many Americans face every day, and you're getting it treated and you're on medication, I don't think that should automatically disqualify you from getting a gun. But doing a background check, as long as everything else is up to snuff. But I do think if you have a demonstrated history of mental illness and being unstable, you should not have access to a gun.
Well, the same thing with people who have substance abuse problems. Would you agree with me? Let's say that I have committed offenses and I have 2 or 3 OUIs. Should I be prohibited from owning guns if I have more than, say, 2 or 3 OUIs?
I don't know. I have to think about that. I'd have to think about that.
Yeah, because, people, unfortunately, who have multiple OUIs have, obviously, substance abuse problems.
Mhm.
And if they have a gun, they could pose a threat to themselves.
And you
or-
can be charged, like we talked about earlier. You
Right.
can certainly be charged with having a gun under the influence of drugs or alcohol.
My only concern is safety for the community. I mean, we can't control individuals doing harm to themselves, but we certainly can protect the community. And oftentimes, in order to protect the community, we have to protect individuals from doing harm to themselves or other individuals.
Right, and I think that's what a background check is for. I don't think there's any really bright line. My bright line would be no domestic abusers, demonstrated history of mental illness, in many cases people convicted of violent crime, and there's other circumstances that I think should disqualify you from being able to purchase a gun. There are areas where I think may not disqualify you, but I do think each state, and certainly the state of Michigan, I'll speak for our state, should have background checks and strong background checks before someone can purchase a gun, and without reference as to where it's purchased.
Now, here's an interesting question. I'm seeing a psychiatrist, and I tell the psychiatrist that I want to get a gun and kill somebody. I know the psychiatrist has a
Due to report, yes.
duty to report, but do they have a duty to report that to law enforcement?
I believe the law is, and again, this is kind of outside my field of expertise, but I believe that the rule is, because it's happened to me, is that they have to report it to the person that the threat is made against. I am not certain that they have to report it to law enforcement. I'm not certain about that.
Okay, well, that at least would put you on notice,
Yes,
and you would have the opportunity to get a PPO
yes.
or do whatever else is
Or
necessary.
do whatever was necessary to protect yourself. That's
Right.
happened to me. I was on a jury one time in the 1990s, and I was an assistant prosecutor then.
You were on a jury
I
while you were
was.
assistant prosecutor.
Yes, I was. It was a civil jury. And I don't know if you remember Judge Rashid. It was in his courtroom.
I just saw Judge Rashid
Yes.
recently. He is a facilitator,
Yes,
an arbitrator.
He is. That's why he left the bench, I think. And it was a racial discrimination case. And I don't remember the company, but the plaintiff was suing for racial discrimination. And I was on the jury, obviously. Jury service is hard. It's a lot harder than it looks. And it was a good thing for me to go through so I can realize what jurors were going through. But anyway, at the end of the case, I was the foreperson, and I still remember some of those jurors, even though it was back in the 90s. And we deliberated that there should be a no cause. Clearly there were issues. Clearly the defendant, and much evidence was presented that the defendant had many, many mental issues, and the things that he was saying happened to him just did not happen, and that was proven in the jury trial, according to us. And about a year later, 18 months later, I received a letter from a psychiatrist who said that this man's, and I remember his name, but I won't say it now, that this man, who had been the plaintiff, had threatened to kill me. And so I received a letter saying that. And at that point, the letter said where he was and that kind of thing. And I gave it to the investigators, and they determined it was no real threat. But I don't know if they had to report it to law enforcement.
Oh, that's interesting because I've had unfortunate circumstances going the other way where I've had clients who've been treated by psychiatrists. They say they're going to go home and kill their spouse, and the psychiatrist hasn't done anything about it. They've actually gone home, killed their spouse. It's as frightening as it may be. It's happened to me twice in practice.
Wow.
Now, there are other weapon issues besides guns. We only talk about guns on the show, but carrying any concealed weapon is illegal, isn't it?
Yes.
Okay, so I'm driving down the road and I've got a knife in the car.
Yeah, carrying a concealed weapon, the statute doesn't say carrying a concealed gun, it says carrying a concealed weapon, yes.
And it doesn't necessarily have to be a gun. It can be a baseball bat. It can be you.
Those are hard to conceal, but yes, it could be.
Well, but it could be a short bat. The
Yeah.
point I'm making is if it's fashioned as an implement used as a weapon or
Yes.
something close to it, it all
Yep.
falls in line there.
Mhm.
I've taken a lot of your time. It's valuable this time of year. I'm going to thank you for coming.
Yes, and again, I thank you for having me. And again, this is not directed to lawful gun owners or people who store their guns safely, but we really need to get a handle on innocent children that are being killed in very preventable deaths, and we really have to get a handle on our gun violence program problem in Michigan.
Would you make me one promise?
Sure,
Would you come back during the year?
I'd be happy to. There are
Thank
many
you
issues
so
that we
much.
could discuss.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
We'll see you again.
Are you in legal trouble? Are you in need of legal advice? Or just have general legal questions? Call 1-800-529-8721. That's 1-800-LAW-USA1. And watch Law Power Hour and get your questions answered by experienced attorneys who are experts in their field. That's Law Power Hour, hosted by Barry Keller, attorney at law. Saturdays at 10 a.m. here on WHPR Detroit Live.
If you're injured over the holidays in an accident and you're uninsured and you're operating your own vehicle, you can't recover under the Michigan no-fault law even if you're not at fault in the accident. And let me explain it this way. You're uninsured, you're driving down the road in an uninsured vehicle that you own, and you're T-boned and it's not your fault, and you're seriously injured. You're out of luck because you have no coverage. So the best thing that you can do during the holidays is don't drive if you're uninsured, and don't drive unless you're driving in a vehicle that has insurance. But you must have a license. If you're driving on a suspended or revoked license, you're going to be precluded from making a claim. And it's the worst time of year, and I can say this 10 times over, there's no good time to be involved in an accident, but during the holidays is the worst time of year because it takes away from the holidays for every member of your family. They have to go to the hospital. You're in the hospital. It changes the dynamics of the holiday. So the best thing that you can do during the holidays is be safe, whether you're driving or you're a passenger in a vehicle. If you're out in the wintertime now, I want you to understand there are other issues that come up all the time. There isn't a winter that goes by that I don't get calls, I slipped and fell on ice. Well, Michigan Supreme Court has said if you slip and fall on ice, your chances of recovery are almost completely zero because everyone knows that we have ice and snow in the winter in Michigan. Under certain limited circumstances, you may have a right to make a claim. But once again, if you're cautious and prudent about what you're doing, you're not going to have an injury from an automobile accident or from a slip and fall in the winter. If you do, you should consult a lawyer right away and get information to assist you in how to handle the claim. Normally, I would tell you not to call my office, but if you just need some insight on these problems, I'll give you the insight. I won't charge you for it. We can be reached at 248-335-9266. If you have any question during the holidays, All the telephone calls when the office is closed come to me. I want to thank you again for listening, and I wish you the best for a Merry Christmas.